Tonight, when the sun goes down, you'll flip a switch. Instantly, your room will fill with light. You won't even think about it. But for almost all of human history, that simple switch didn't exist. When the sun disappeared, the world became almost completely dark. You could barely see your own hand in front of your face. Most people today never experienced darkness like that. For more than 300,000 years, every one of your ancestors spent nearly half their life surrounded by darkness. They had no streetlights, no lamps. For most of that time, they didn't even have candles. Only the stars above and the fire they managed to keep burning. So what did they do during those long nights? The answer might completely change the way you think about sleep, stories, and even what it means to be human. It all begins with fire. Without fire, none of this would have been possible. The oldest clear evidence of humans controlling fire comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. It dates back around 1 million years, but fire did far more than keep people warm. It changed the entire rhythm of human life. Before fire, our ancestors lived much like other primates. As soon as the sun went down, they climbed into trees or found a safe place to hide. Then they stayed there, because moving through the darkness was incredibly dangerous. Humans don't see well at night, but the animals hunting them did. Leopards, hyenas, wolves. For those predators, the darkness was an advantage. Fire changed everything. A single campfire created a small circle of safety, about 30 feet across. Inside that glowing circle, most predators stayed away. Outside it, survival became much less certain. And this isn't just a theory. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer communities have found that people who leave the fire at night are far more likely to be attacked by predators, even today. But here's the most surprising part. Fire didn't just protect our ancestors. It gave them something they had never had before: more time. Think about it. Before humans mastered fire, the useful part of the day ended when the sun went down. In summer, that gave people around 12 hours. In winter, sometimes only 8. Then fire changed everything. Suddenly, every day became 2 to 4 hours longer. Those extra hours may not sound like much, but over thousands of generations, they helped shape the human species. A fascinating study, published in 2014 by anthropologist Polly Wiesner, revealed just how important those hours became. She spent years living with the Ju-Huansi people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the few communities that still live in a way similar to our distant ancestors. She carefully recorded what people talked about during the day and at night. The difference was incredible. During the day, most conversations were practical. Who was going hunting? Where could they find food? Which plants were ready to collect? People discussed work, daily problems, and survival. But once the sun went down and everyone gathered around the fire, everything changed. More than 80% of their conversations became stories. They shared adventures, told funny jokes, talked about people in distant places, passed down myths about how the world began. The camp filled with laughter and imagination. Wiesner believes these moments helped create human culture. The campfire became humanity's first classroom, its first theater, its first place of learning. It was where people stopped thinking only about surviving today and started imagining tomorrow. That's one of the things that made us truly human. But the night held another surprise, one that scientists only fully understood in recent decades. It turns out, you may not be meant to sleep the way you do today. In 2001, historian Roger E. Kirch published research that completely changed how experts think about sleep. He spent 16 years studying old books, diaries, court records, letters, medical writings, and religious texts. Again and again, he found the same strange pattern. People kept mentioning something called first sleep and second sleep. Before the Industrial Revolution, sleeping through the entire night was not the norm. People usually went to bed soon after sunset. They slept for around 4 hours. Then they naturally woke up. Instead of worrying about it, they stayed awake for an hour or two, and only then, they returned to bed for their second sleep. After that quiet break, people simply went back to sleep. They rested for another 4 hours until sunrise. This wasn't a sleep disorder. It wasn't insomnia. For thousands of years, this was completely normal. It was how humans naturally slept. So what did people do during those peaceful hours in the middle of the night? Quite a lot. A French doctor from the 1500s even suggested that married couples should use this time to have children, believing it was the best moment. Some people visited nearby neighbors. Others thought about the dreams they had just experienced while they were still fresh. Some wrote in journals. Others simply lay awake, staring into the darkness, letting their minds wander. A medical guide from the 16th century even called this period the watch. It described these quiet hours between first and second sleep as the perfect time to think, study, and reflect. The world was silent. The mind was calm. It was a rare moment of complete peace. For centuries, historians kept finding references to first sleep and second sleep, but many didn't believe people actually slept that way. The idea seemed so strange that some translators even changed the original meaning of ancient texts to fit modern sleep habits. They assumed people in the past slept just like we do today, but they were wrong. Then modern science stepped in, and it confirmed what history had been saying all along. In 1992, psychiatrist Thomas Weir conducted a remarkable experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health. He asked volunteers to live without artificial light for an entire month. Every night they spent 14 hours in darkness, much closer to the conditions our ancestors experienced. Something amazing happened. Within just a few weeks, every participant settled into the same routine. They slept for about 4 hours, then they naturally woke up. They stayed quietly awake for 1 to 3 hours, and afterward, they drifted into a second sleep for another 4 hours. No one instructed them to follow this pattern. No one even mentioned it. Their bodies simply remembered what humans had done for thousands of years. Their bodies simply returned to that pattern on their own. It was almost as if an ancient program had been hidden inside them all along, just waiting for darkness to bring it back. But that wasn't the only surprising discovery. During those quiet hours between the two sleeps, Thomas Weir measured the volunteers' hormone levels. What he found was unexpected. Their bodies produced much higher levels of prolactin. This is the same hormone linked to deep relaxation, meditation, and the feeling of calm after orgasm. The volunteers didn't describe feeling tired. Instead, they felt peaceful, calm, thoughtful, almost as if they were meditating without trying. This wasn't just time spent awake. It was a completely different state of consciousness, one that most people today never experience. So what made it disappear? The answer is surprisingly simple: light. Everything changed once humans began pushing back the darkness. In the 1600s, cities started installing street lamps. Paris was among the first, under King Louis XIV, as a way to make the streets safer. London soon followed. Slowly, the night became less frightening. People could stay outside long after sunset. Then candles became cheaper. Gas lamps spread across cities in the 1800s. And finally, in 1879, Thomas Edison helped bring electric light into everyday life. Within just a few decades, the nighttime that humans had lived with for hundreds of thousands of years had almost disappeared. But there's another fascinating detail. Have you ever wondered where the word curfew comes from? It comes from the old French phrase couvre-feu. It literally means cover the fire. Each evening, a bell would ring through medieval towns. That was the signal for families to cover or put out their fires, not only to reduce the risk of fire, but because the night was meant to be dark. Darkness was a normal part of life. Night was the time to rest. It was also the time when humans were at their most vulnerable. For much of history, being outside after dark made people suspicious. In many medieval towns across Europe, walking the streets at night without a lantern could even be against the law. After sunset, the darkness belonged to thieves, and to whatever people believed was hiding in the shadows. For thousands of years, people feared the night, not because it was mysterious, but because it was dangerous. Today, it's hard for us to imagine that kind of darkness. Then everything changed. We filled the night with light, and we called it progress. But in doing so, we may have lost something important. The average person is now surrounded by artificial light for 7 to 8 hours after sunset. That includes room lights, street lights, TVs, phones, and computer screens. The biggest problem is blue light. It tells your brain that the sun is still up. Your body can't tell the difference between sunlight and a bright light bulb. So when you're staring at a screen late at night, your brain thinks it's still daytime. As a result, it delays the release of melatonin, the hormone that helps you fall asleep. Your sleep becomes lighter, less restful, and your natural body clock slowly falls out of sync. Researchers have discovered something fascinating. People who spend just 1 week camping without any artificial light experience a dramatic change. Their melatonin begins rising close to sunset again, nearly 2 hours earlier than before. Just 1 week. That's all it takes for an ancient biological pattern to begin returning. Think about what that means. Modern life didn't just change when we sleep. It may have erased an entire state of human experience. That peaceful period between first sleep and second sleep, the quiet time Thomas Weir's volunteers described as calm, reflective, and deeply relaxing, most people never experience it anymore. Instead, many wake up in the middle of the night, panic, and assume something is wrong. But what if it isn't? What if waking up at 2 in the morning isn't a mistake? What if your brain is simply following a pattern it learned over hundreds of thousands of years? For most of human history, nights followed a very different rhythm. Families gathered around the fire. They shared stories, passed down knowledge, strengthened their communities. They slept in 2 separate phases, and between them, they enjoyed a quiet moment to think, to reflect, to simply exist in complete silence. The darkness around them was so deep that the Milky Way wasn't a rare sight. It was part of everyday life. Every night, when they opened their eyes between their 2 sleeps, they weren't reaching for a phone. They weren't checking notifications. They simply rested in the silence, thinking about their lives, their dreams, and the sunrise that would soon arrive. Today, all it takes is one flip of a switch to erase the darkness. It's an incredible invention, but perhaps, without realizing it, we left something valuable behind.